After Day of the Dead, it would be almost 20 years before Romero would return to the genre with 2005's Land of the Dead. However, when it comes to the whole spirit of a zombie film defining the decade it was made, strangely it wasn't Romero who would make the defining zombie movie of the 2000s. Instead, rather oddly, what I would consider the defining zombie film of the 2000s came from the United Kingdom and was made by three friends who were obsessed with pop culture, and in particular the films of Romero. Enter Simon Pegg, Nick Frost and Edgar Wright, who at the time were nothing more than two comedians on the up who'd largely been known for bit parts, but more recently were fresh off the set of a small cult comedy show known as Spaced, and Edgar Wright, who at the time was also a fledgling director who'd done several smaller cult TV shows and one feature film that was never commercially released. The three were all creatively bursting at the seams and wanted to channel that energy into a feature-length production. It was while filming one of the sketches for the first series of Spaced that they first got the inspiration to make a zombie film, and from there they went into production on what was billed at the time as the world's first and only romantic comedy with zombies. A RomZomCom, if you will. This production went on to become 2004's Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead follows Shaun, the average everyday Brit in his late 20s whose world is slowly stagnating. His relationship with his girlfriend has stalled, he has a difficult relationship with his stepfather as well, he's in a dead-end job and his best friend Ed seems only to exacerbate these issues, leading Shaun further away from where he thinks he should be. The pair practically live in a nearby pub, and after a particularly heavy night they awake to find that the dead have risen, though at first they're fairly oblivious to this. When it finally dawns on them what's happening, they try to hatch a plan to rescue Shaun's parents, get Shaun's girlfriend back, and hold up in a pub until it all blows over. What follows, however, is the exact opposite of a straightforward plan, with hilarious results. This film perfectly captures both the mindset and tone of the British mentality around the turn of the century. The British are a largely placid lot, and it really takes a lot to bother us. We can take or leave most things, and we have a curmudgeonly outlook on most things in life. Basically, we don't want to cause a fuss, and we plan for and expect the worst 9 times out of 10. And the core cast in this film reflect that tone to a T. So I seriously have to commend the script on this film, which, much like the Romero films before it, have an incredibly smooth and naturalistic dialogue, and believably funny lines coupled with delivery that you could imagine your friends saying in a situation like this. It's razor sharp and comes from a very genuine and sincere place. It's a tight production that has almost next to no padding and feels very lightweight and punchy. This is a comedy film starring an all-star cast of comedians in their prime, and my god is this cast list a who's who's of comedians from the mid-2000s, with guest appearances by Matt Lucas, Dylan Moran, Reece Shearsmith, Peter Serafinovich, Lucy Davis, Tamsin Greig and Martin Freeman, just to name a few. And those performances are all solid as well. This is a very dry comedy, with quite a lot of humour arising from the grimness of the situation. And Pegg and Frost absolutely deliver as leading cast members in making sure that every single delivery is on the nose and holds for exactly the right amount of time. Kate Ashfield as Liz is equally good acting as the glue that sticks Shaun and Ed to David and Diane, who are Liz's flatmates and don't really like Shaun or Ed. These contrasting opinions and values lead to a great amount of tension building in the Winchester pub scenes, as they decide what to do next when their plan doesn't quite pull off as intended. And from here we really get to see some excellent Romero-esque tension building, as the atmosphere bubbles over as the grim reality of the situation begins to set in, and the group start to fall out over trivial points. Wright leads the direction on this one, and even at this very early stage in his career, it's clear to see his defining style has been built on since his work on Spaced. Wright utilises quick cuts to transition scenes, which helps keep the continuity in check, but also helps to give a boost to shots that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be particularly interesting. It's a type of hyper-condensing that allows him to compress entire scenes down to just 5 or 6 quick cuts. When used sparingly, as it is in this film, It helps us to quickly cut to the chase and get to the good stuff, whilst also effectively giving the audience a ramp with which to launch themselves straight into the meat of the next scene. It was a revolutionary style to see brought to the mainstream cinema. However, it did come with the downside that literally every film student and their dog essentially nicked Wright's style because it looked cool for at least the following decade and beyond. The direction is only built on by some superb cinematography from David Dunlap, who faithfully recreates and builds on the shot mixes and experimentation of the original 3 of the Dead films. When matched to the direction, we get a complete hand-in-hand experience that looks like a high-energy Romero film for a younger generation. It feels fresh and new, with a very vibrant colour palette that pushes the saturation up where necessary and crushes the blacks to give a really effective filmic grittiness, particularly in those pub scenes. And the lovely little tributes throughout this film to the original 3 films are a very welcome addition, such as little music stings from Dawn of the Dead. The idea that zombies can learn and can use tools is also brought up at least once or twice. But it's subverted here. Rather than being looked at as a thing of curiosity, our cast just sort of shrug it off and go back to braining them. They also revisit the idea of television helping to dictate what the characters do from a moral standpoint, as was the case in Dawn and was later developed more wholesale in Day. I can't go any further on this without mentioning the absolutely stellar soundtrack that accompanies this film, with tracks from The Specials, Queen, Zombie Nation, Chicago, and much, much more. They use sound brilliantly here, making it both diegetic and non-diegetic to suit the film as and when required. In particular, the Queen jukebox scene is an absolute highlight of the film in my opinion, perfectly contrasting all the elements of this film I love into one coherent minute or so long sequence. This film, however, doesn't get away scot-free. It does have some issues. Shaun as a character is great, with a warm humour mixing with a more serious side that follows as his life starts to fall apart. He does, however, at several points in the film seem to have a bit of the Ferris Bueller effect, with people blindly trusting him and treating him like a bit of a messianic figure, particularly in the 3rd act. And that was a slightly off moment for me. Not enough for me to say it ruins the film, but it definitely needs flagging up, because to me I found it to be a bit tonally off with the rest of the film's narrative and profile of Shaun. Also, whereas the original films all have a sense of timelessness about them, technology is largely a framing device or put in the background ahead of more important issues, Shaun of the Dead embraces the time it was made, and this may have been to its detriment, as nearly 13 years later the technology featured throughout is starting to look a bit dated, and the fashion and style the cast wear is also starting to very slowly but surely edge into the strange territory where it doesn't quite match modern fashions, which apart from making me feel quite old is slightly upsetting to see for a film that isn't even 15 years old yet. There are other issues as well, like the plotline for Diane that comes completely out of left field and feels very out of place compared with the rest of the film. So much so that one of the extra features on the DVD is simply an explanation of what happened to her after a plotline ends. And somehow it makes even less sense than her last scene does. I also have to say that there's a very sharp tonal jump in the last 15 minutes or so where the comedy element of this film more or less goes completely out of the window, barring the odd fart joke. And it just turns into a straight-up action horror film, which seemed quite odd after the previous hour and a quarter of nearly perfectly balanced horror-comedy setup. It would later become apparent that the last 15 minutes or so of this film would be quite reminiscent of Pegg and Frost's next feature, 2006's Hot Fuzz. But here it just came across as a bit off. These are only minor blemishes on what is, on the whole, a very enjoyable film. Romero himself saw this shortly before its first proper screening and was very impressed with it. While he didn't go as far as to give Shaun of the Dead his blessing, I don't think he needed to. Nor do I think he should have. This film could be seen as a continuation of Romero's style, but in the same breath it could be seen as a fitting tribute to those classic films. And in the same space it also stands on its own 2 feet as its own thing. While not directly linked to Romero, this film is a love letter to the man and a genuine, passionate attempt to modernise his craft. It feels like it came from a very sincere place and has a rock-solid foundation in terms of casting, direction and editing, all of which were frankly quite unique for the time. It's well on its way to being a cult classic, but whether it will hold up in 30 to 40 years' time, only time will tell.